I witnessed something late at night on 4th of July that I feel the need to share. Bear with me here, because I'm not a great storyteller, but I wrote down all the events and even drew a map of everything that occurred immediately after, so I'd never forget. To give some context, I'm a fucking weirdo and spend a lot of time hiking. I've been dealing with some serious emotional and mental distress brought on by things which are out of my control. My way of coping and finding comfort is by being a fucking weirdo and tempting fate by going on late night hikes. Turns out, I made the right decision by going out to the countryside to enjoy the view of the full moon, see the fireflies shine deep in the woods. I parked my car at the unmarked pull-off next to the river, which is surrounded by dense forest and unforgiving swamps. I started on my way on foot at about 11:30 p.m. I may or may not have had a few White Claws stuffed into my backpack, but that's besides the point. After walking for about 2.5 mostly uneventful hours, I decided it was time to double back and go find my car. This is the part where things go from, I feel a bit better and more at ease, to, oh holy shit, what the ever-loving fuck have I stumbled onto? I began crossing the bridge to get to my car, which was still roughly 3 miles to the west of where I was on the bridge at that time, when I hear footsteps on the asphalt approaching me from behind. My mood shifts to, make my day, I am so ready to cut you if you even think about attacking me. I whipped around and see a man wearing all black who was much closer than what it sounded like. We make eye contact. Full moon, pretty easy to see at night. And this dude breaks into a full ass sprint towards me and then veers around me at the last minute. Maybe it was the liquid courage and pure adrenaline, but I yelled out at the guy, "Hey man, you good? Sup?" And he replies, "I gotta get to my wife." Swiftly veers around me and keeps running. I'm thinking to myself, okay, kinda weird considering it's 0200 and in the middle of nowhere, but I digress. He runs out of sight and I keep walking to my car. I make it about 1.5 miles further when I hear a woman screaming, crying, wailing. The kind that makes your hair stand up. The kind that tells you in your gut that something is seriously wrong. I stop and listen. Through the sobs I hear her say, "Please, I can't take it. I don't want any more. Please don't." And at this point, I wanted to throw up. Her screams were coming from the same path I had to take to get back to my car. I channeled the energy of the movie Tropic Thunder and went full Viet Cong, dove into the bushes, and stealthily made my way closer to see what the fuck was going on and find this screaming woman. It didn't take long. I now see the same man that ran past me earlier and a second, much larger man, also dressed in black, walking on the road coming back in my direction. The larger man had the woman slung over his shoulder like she was a sack of potatoes. She wasn't screaming anymore, but she was crying and completely incoherent. She looked like she was maybe 19 to 21 at most, blonde hair, and was very small. I'd say 110 pounds at most. I popped out of the tree line and asked man one, "Is that your wife? Is everything okay?" He says, "Yeah, she's fine. She just can't handle her liquor." As he said this, both the men continued walking past me. The woman is clearly not drunk, but appears to be drugged. She was trying to talk, but her speech was very slurred, and she couldn't even lift her arms or head to get out of this man's grasp. To the best of her ability, the woman keeps trying to say, "Please, no, help." She was trying so hard to lift her head and look at me, and reach her arms out to me, but she was so weakened by whatever they had done to her that she was incapable of even making out a single word. Something was seriously wrong. Something much more than alcohol. Not 15 minutes prior, I was able to hear her screaming actual words, and now she appears barely conscious. I carry pepper gels, razor blades when I hike. However, I knew there was no way I could take on 2 men by trying my hand at some vigilante justice. I'm about 5'6", 140 pounds, and definitely no match for 2 men twice my size. Self-preservation and survival mode kicks in for me, and I say to man one, "Oh yeah, I've been there before. I'm sure she'll sleep it off and be just fine." Please understand, I only said this to him as a means of playing dumb. Again, I'm not equipped to take down two men. The woman tries to cry and plead more as they carry her away. I was quite honestly terrified. That sight and the connection I felt between myself and the woman pleading for help is something I will never forget. Once they were 20 feet behind me, I take a quick glance over my shoulder to see what is happening because the slurred cries she was letting out were nauseating. I wanted to be sure that they weren't harming her further. I see them stop in the middle of the road and look back at me. It took everything in me to be cool, act as though I didn't notice them looking and couldn't care less what they were up to. Again, self-preservation. They began walking further away from me then. I quickened my pace to go hide behind a sloped railroad track out of their view. I called 911. I described to the dispatcher what I had just seen, and I believe that the woman was being taken away against her will and appeared to be drugged. The dispatcher on the line says,
"Yeah, we've got 2 other calls earlier tonight. We'll go ahead and work on sending someone out."
"Great police work, my dudes. Keep in mind, this is one of those out in the boonies, and most people seem to think that sort of thing don't happen around here, even though we have an extensive amount of cold case of women and children here in this area." I'm only a mile away from my car now. Obviously the police gave approximately 2 fucks about this woman's safety, but I was so disturbed by what I saw that I knew it was time to go find these guys myself since it seemed no one else was going to. Side note, the amount of cigarettes I smoke in a day is roughly equivalent to the amount of toilet paper sold during the pandemic. I was huffing a cigarette, crying slightly, praying for her safety, praying that they wouldn't disappear to God knows where, to God knows what. What I'm saying is, I ran like never before to get to my car and track down these men again before they could drop out of sight with her. I don't personally know this woman, but I'll be damned if I don't do everything I can to help her when she's clearly in danger and unable to help herself. I floored it to where I saw them last. Maybe 15 to 20 minutes had passed from the last time we crossed paths, and when I got to my car. As much to my relief, as I rounded the corner, I see multiple police units on the scene up the road. I drove up closer just to be sure they found the right guys, and they did. They had the men up against their cruisers with their hands up and were being frisked. Paramedics were at the scene, and this poor woman was laying on the ground as they were working to place her onto the stretcher and get her to the hospital. The sense of relief I felt was unreal, but probably not even a fraction of the relief that this woman felt when the police finally intervened. Dispatch actually called me back and advised that they had not sent officers previously as the situation was described to them as a noise disturbance. Not unusual for a holiday weekend. Can't willfully blame them for not coming sooner since they did not receive any calls stating that there was a woman screaming for help or being carried off caveman style against her will in the middle of nowhere in the wee hours of night. Needless to say, I didn't sleep for the rest of that night. I went home and sobbed all day, mostly out of the horror of what I saw and the awful thought of, what if I hadn't taken that walk? What if no one got help for her? What if they would have grabbed me too? I'll close with this. Don't be a bystander. If you see something, say something. I would like to start this off by saying this actually took place a few years ago, but it seemed relevant to post since a lot of people are doing online dating right now. One summer when I was in law school, I was swiping through Tinder looking for someone to hang out with. I matched with this guy that seemed pretty nice and looked good, lots of shirtless photos. He was a counselor at a local high school in the metro area. We texted for a while, talked on the phone, and then decided to grab brunch the next weekend. I met him in the restaurant, and we had brunch with bottomless mimosas. He was nice and funny, made me laugh a lot. I think we both got a little tipsy. He said he was going to go to a barbecue at his friend's house after brunch and asked me to come. He seemed pretty cool and I was having a good time, so I agreed. I had to walk my dog because I hadn't anticipated being out that long. So I told him I would meet him back at the restaurant in 30 minutes. He said he really wanted to meet my dog and asked if he could walk the dog with me. I thought about it for a second, but my place was a total disaster, so I told him no. I came back to the restaurant and we grabbed an Uber to his friend's house. There were a bunch of people drinking and talking. Everyone was nice. They had the barbecue situation going on out back. We talked to some people, hung out, drank. He started to get drunk and handsy, so I told him I wanted a drink and walked into the kitchen for some space. A couple minutes later, he comes into the kitchen and tries to kiss me. I kinda smiled and shrugged my way out of his grasp and told him I needed to go to the bathroom. I asked him to grab me a drink and meet me outside in the backyard. When I left the restroom, I walked straight out the front door 2 blocks down and took a right. I grabbed an Uber home. I started getting calls and texts, but just blocked him. He tried to reach out over social media, but I just blocked him there too. Totally forgot about him. Fast forward 3 years. I'm sitting on the couch chilling, reading through the local news on my phone. I scroll and see the picture of this guy's face. He had been arrested for raping women that he met on Tinder. This happened to me a few years ago in an old one-person flat. I had a strange feeling that something wasn't right for a few days. Like, I was sure that food in the fridge was less than when I had put it back the last time. I found pillows from my couch on the floor, stuff like that. I lived alone back then, so there wasn't anyone else that had access to my flat, or so I thought. Well, one night I woke up around 1 a.m., sweating, and even though I didn't remember, was sure I woke up from a nightmare. Since I was drenched in sweat, I decided to take a shower. So I put my phone up in the bathroom for music, turned on the water, and enjoyed my shower. A few moments in, I heard the door move. I never close it, but it still never moves. I took a look at the shower curtain and saw a shadow against it, and a look at my phone confirmed someone was there, since I could clearly see the reflection in my screen that showed someone standing next to the shower curtain. It took me a lot not to scream and keep acting like I didn't notice anything, while silently taking the shower head off the holding and turning the water all the way hot. I'm still kind of impressed of my quick thinking. Our water got really hot when you cranked it all the way, and a few seconds later, the steam was rising and the water was hurting my feet, flowing to the drain. I turned around, ripped the shower curtain open, and held the shower head right at the person. It was a woman. She screamed in pain. I whacked her in the face with the shower head and jumped out of the shower, running to the door, taking the key out of the lock and locking it closed behind me. A little while later, she starts to bang on the door, but the door didn't give. Thank God for German quality work. I called the cops and went to the kitchen to get a big kitchen knife, just for safety. I felt like my throat was closing up when I saw it missing, and realized there's only one place where it could possibly be right now. The police arrested the woman, who turns out to be the former person living in the flat, and was evicted for not paying rent. Seems she made a copy of the key, and came to the flat when I was at work, and sometimes at night. It's possible that what woke me up in the first place was her, and honestly, I don't even want to think about it. Ever since then, I always insist that the locks are changed when I move into a new place. Edit. Since a lot of people ask, I found the kitchen knife in the bathroom, so she definitely brought it in with her, and either the police disarmed her, or she dropped it herself at any point. I've always been good friends with one of my cousins, Cole, who's the same age I am. The two of us were not quite inseparable, but we always did get along very well together, and were often found together, both in school and outside of it. When we were 12 and in the 6th grade, I was hanging out with Cole on a Friday night, around the late part of May, and we were psyched at the start of the weekend. We wound up at his house, since he didn't live too far away from me, and at one point, my mom called to say that my grandpa was in the hospital. While the issue with her grandpa wasn't expected to be life-threatening, he was only being kept in the hospital overnight for observation. Both my parents and Cole's were planning on staying with his grandma at the hospital. Since my mom and her sister were the only siblings who lived close by, I was told that I was given the okay to stay at Cole's house for the night, with Cole's 15-year-old brother Hunter being in charge while our parents were out. This was fine by us. I got along well enough with Hunter, and he was never the bossy older brother cousin that some of my other friends said that they had to put up with. We ordered out for pizza and enjoyed goofing off as boys tend to do at that age. Around 9 or so, there was a knock at the front door and Cole went to answer it. I was a bit curious of who it could be at that time of night, and so I watched from a ways back. At the door were two older guys. They said that they were with the city and that they were investigating reports about the water pressures supposedly being bad in the neighborhood. They asked Cole if his parents were home, and when Cole said that they were unavailable at that moment, which we were told to say to strangers if our parents weren't home, these guys started asking a bunch of questions about how the water pressure was in the house, and if they could come inside to check. Hunter came over at this point and politely told the guys that the water pressure was fine, and perhaps they should move on to check the other homes in the neighborhood. These guys seemed reluctant to leave, but turned and walked away after Hunter started closing the door. After the door was shut, we looked at each other and shrugged, but didn't think too much of it after that and went back to goofing off. Eventually, we decided to go to bed. Cole and Hunter shared a bedroom, and we all agreed that I would sleep in there with them, rather than me hitting the sack on the couch or something like that, so we could talk while we fell asleep. Hunter even grabbed the sleeping bag out of their camping supplies for me. When we got into his bedroom, they stripped down to their briefs, and I remember Cole had mentioned to me a while back that they had started sleeping in just their underwear. Since I hadn't originally planned to stay the night, I hadn't brought anything with me from my home as far as overnight stuff, but since I wasn't in the mood to sleep in my clothes, I stripped down to my briefs as well. Though I felt a bit embarrassed, even though they were all guys, and I knew they wouldn't say anything or be judgmental. They climbed into their beds, and I quickly climbed into the sleeping bag. And after talking for a while about random stuff, we eventually fell asleep. Early the next morning, I got up because I had to pee, so I quietly got out of the sleeping bag and went and did my business in the bathroom. On the way back to the bedroom, I heard something from the family room, which was on the opposite end of the house from the bedrooms and particular bathroom I was using. I didn't pay much attention to it at the time, thinking it must either be Cole or Hunter, until I got back to the bedroom and realized that both of them were still in there. Trying not to panic, I woke them up and told them I thought someone was in the house. They quietly followed me, and the moment we walked into the family room, we saw the two guys from the night before in there, and it was rather clear that they were robbing the place. One of them started moving towards us and pulled out a wicked-looking knife. The three of us promptly raced to the front door, somehow managed to get it unlocked and open, and fled outside. As luck would have it, a cop was driving by at that particular moment. We quickly flagged him down and told him that there was two guys in the house. The cop called for backup, and within a couple minutes, several other cops were there. They proceeded to enter the house, and after some searching, they caught the two guys. The cops figured that the two guys must have entered through a window in the laundry room that had a broken latch, and probably targeted that house because, while it wasn't empty, they probably realized that there was no adults there, and figured that if we had discovered them, we could be more easily dealt with than adults. To add insult to injury, while we were waiting outside, while the cops searched the house, both to get the guys and make sure there wasn't anyone else with them, some of the neighbors came out to see what the commotion was about. That included some kids that went to the same school as Cole and me, including a few that were in our 6th grade class with us. It was during that time that the three of us realized that we never had a chance to get dressed, so, just like in a stereotypical nightmare, we were standing outside in full view of everyone, in just our briefs, and what seemed like forever before being allowed back inside. When we went back to school on Monday, Cole and I had to put up with a bit of snickering, stares, and ribbings for the next few weeks, until school ended for the summer. Just got back home. I went out to eat with a couple of friends, one of whom was from out of state to visit. We turned off the highway onto an exit, and right around the corner, just out of sight after the turn, a white car was parked mostly in the road with the door open, no hazards on. A guy just sitting there in the car. I got a horrible, instant realization that it was intentional and not a problem with his car. I yelled at her to reverse immediately. The guy gets out of the car, fists clenched, stumbling and taking very strange, jerky steps directly towards us. She froze and started shaking. I had to scream at her to reverse again, even though cars were piling up behind us. I told her to let the cars go in front of us and keep backing up slowly, and he just ignores the other vehicles, still staring at the two girls in the front seat, just beelining right for us. We managed to pull up as the other vehicles were also trying to figure out what the fuck was going on, and he seemed to get confused at the amount of cars passing him now, and started heading back to his vehicle. I am positive it was to grab some sort of weapon or gun. We managed to squeeze around and accelerate past him, and she's sobbing now. I am very certain that he was on heavy drugs and alcohol and had a psychotic breakdown from the look of him. He wasn't asking for help. He wasn't trying to rob anyone. This guy blocked traffic on the highway with the intention of probably murdering the first person he was able to block in. I still have adrenaline rushing even now thinking about it. In April of last year, my boyfriend and I were walking home from our friend's house. I had just finished my first year at college and we wanted to go out and celebrate and have some fun. I live in a rural town, and our friend lived on the far side of it, so our walk was about a half hour or so. I had a drink or two and smoked some of the joint they had rolled. Smoking makes me paranoid, and this night was no different. Anyway, we left at maybe 10 or 11, and everything was perfectly normal until we got to the end of the long street that would eventually lead to my house. This street always feels so long to walk. Like hours can pass by and you barely made a dent in the amount of steps made. The street we turned onto, this road, was maybe 10 blocks away from my house. A few minutes after we turned onto the road, I felt like something was off, but my boyfriend said that I was stoned and reminded me that I'm a pretty paranoid person to begin with. I really am. This white truck that was parked in front of some houses turns on and begins to drive slowly away, and would then park. I watched it to see if I was just being paranoid or not, and it proceeds to stop a couple houses down and sat there with the car still on. As we got closer, it would drive away, parking a little farther away. This continued until we got to the end of my street. At this point, I kept telling my boyfriend that I'm not paranoid and this truck was fucking with us, and he had gone quiet. A couple houses down from mine, this truck drives to the end of the street. My house is on the corner. There's a dead end right by my house because we live near a river. It stops for a moment at the dead end and then proceeds to turn, and then turn on its high beams and begins slowly driving towards us. My boyfriend sticks his arm out in front of me, stopping me from walking any further as his truck continues to approach. My house was so close, yet so far. This truck slowly drives by us. The windows are tinted, but we could see two silhouettes, and because they had blinded us, we didn't think to look at the license plate or even the model of the truck. I swear, I felt like this night I was gonna die, or worse. My thoughts hurled around in my mind, and I could see my boyfriend was in the same mindset. My boyfriend, being pretty quick on his feet, waited until the truck disappeared from sight, and took my hand before racing to my house and locking the door. He had thought about turning down one of the streets so we could lose them, but figured we would wait until they were out of sight and book it to my house so they wouldn't see which house we went in. We looked out one of the front windows very carefully and saw the truck come back into view and begin to drive around the block, presumably looking for us. This went on for 10 minutes. I called the police to inform them that we had been followed, but without a license plate or model, they could really only keep their eyes open for suspicious white trucks. I was adamant that people had to know one of us, if not me, because they drove until they were beside my house. Whether they actually knew it was my house or not, I don't know. My boyfriend tries to insist that it was probably a bunch of kids trying to mess with us, but I don't believe that. A few days later, we heard that someone was picked up and was last seen in a white truck. Since this night, there have been stories in the paper and online that people have been grabbing people, and these people were trafficked in the area. I still see reports even today, which prompted this unsettling memory. It makes me wonder if they were some of these people, and if they were they after both of us or just one of us? Or were they truly a bunch of assholes trying to mess with us? Either way, I don't care to know. Whenever I see a white truck, I become on edge. It may be silly, but the events that night are still fresh in my mind. To the people in the white truck, let's never meet. My best friend died on June 6th. We were inseparable since we were children. It was sudden and tragic, and she was only 23 years old. She was my everything and my very best friend in the world. We knew when each other were sick, because we'd start to feel sick. We had the same dreams while sleeping. We usually joked about being platonic soulmates. We were both strongly spiritual, so in my grief, 2 days after she died, during my meltdown in the kitchen, I felt like she was with me, watching me sob and pound my fists on the counters. I screamed, "If you can hear me right now, if you were right all along that something comes after this, I need you to tell me. Move something. We used to research this. Or send me something. I don't know, send me runaway balloons." I had written a poem for her on the day she died called "Blues Don't Go to Heaven." My mom asked me if I would like to go pick up my sister from work with her, and I refused. Not wanting me to be alone, she convinced me to get in the car. As we hit the stop sign, what shoots out directly in front of us? A random bouquet of perfectly timed red and silver runaway balloons. When I went through her phone, I realized my name had a red balloon emoji beside it. It doesn't end there though. In the photo you could see the balloons in the sky. They were tiny and were already way up there when I took this, and I was shaking. A few weeks after, I had a dream that I was sobbing in a room and there was someone in a white gown that was decorating a tree. When I screamed out that I was alone now, the person turned around and it was my best friend. Look at the bottom of the photo. You wouldn't know, but I swear that's her. There was nothing in front of my car when this photo was taken. She had wispy black hair, and that is her from behind, down to the uneven bra straps she always had while alive, and the white gown. Yesterday, I had this sudden memory of a video I had of her and I decorating a Christmas tree together. I'd totally forgotten about it, but I found it and heard her laugh, and it was such comfort. I just wanted to share.
Wendell was a panhandler near my college. I always gave him my change when I had extra. Usually I kept a hard rule not to give money to individuals, because I gave it to known local charities instead, where I could be sure the money is going to a specific cause. This one panhandler though, he always sang opera music, quite beautifully, all things considered, even though it was clear he was begging for money due to poverty and homelessness, not busking for tips. I always thought it was admirable that he was trying to perform a service in exchange for the money, and I don't like carrying coins, so I gave what I could. It wasn't much, barely $1 each time. I would occasionally strike up conversations with Wendell, even if I didn't have any money for him. He liked to make students laugh with funny impressions or jokes. He was a bit older. I'm an undergrad, and he was probably in his 40s or 50s. So we'd mostly have quick chats about the news or the weather, or whatever. Nothing deep. Sometimes he'd randomly share something so intimate that I'd feel obliged to reciprocate with something at least superficial personal. Example, he'd blurt out that he almost went to college on a baseball scholarship, but drugs ruined everything. I'd be like, "Oh wow, sorry to hear that. I play volleyball. Not for scholarship though. See you around, okay?" Once Wendell called me over while I was walking with a professor / my advisor, and I didn't want to be rude. So I went over just to say a quick hello and introduced my advisor. When we walked away, my advisor was pretty clearly horrified and asked why Wendell knew me by name. I explained our little friendship. He said that the homeless in the city weren't like the homeless in the smaller towns back home. I figured he was being elitist, and I think he could tell that I hadn't taken him seriously, because after we dropped the subject, just before I left, he reiterated that I shouldn't forge friendships with the homeless population in the city, or even give them money because of the chronically homeless. The ones in the streets enough that you could get to know them tend to have criminal or addictive histories. I was surprised because my advisor is usually pretty progressive and passionate, so I appealed to him with, Wendell is a victim of a post-capitalist society, and all the other things I learned in his very own class. But he wasn't having any of it, basically saying however Wendell became chronically homeless, now he was and I should act accordingly. So my professor strongly implored me not to continue even talking to Wendell at all. I kind of shook my head thinking, okay boomer, and if anything felt fortified by the warning, like it was a confirmation that I was a radical doing the right thing, leading a new path, breaking down barriers, bettering society. I got closer to Wendell and shared more of my life with him. But the very next time I had talked to Wendell, he was really irritable and distant. I wasn't sure why, until he said, so, your boyfriend, you two live together or what? I had no idea what he was talking about. I said, what boyfriend? And he said, the guy I met yesterday you were walking down the street with. And I laughed. I explained it wasn't my boyfriend. It was just my academic advisor. Then all of a sudden he wasn't irritable anymore. He was as chatty as he's ever been. I probably should have taken that as a red flag. But I didn't think about Wendell much at all then. I only saw him once or twice a week and only for a few minutes. It was around then that Wendell started bringing me gifts. I'd pass him and he'd have flowers for me, or a metal machine piece. I never refused because I figured it was a means of preserving his dignity when accepting money, like with his opera singing. One of my roommates did remark on the flowers once, and when I explained, she said it was weird. I thought she was also just being an elitist, and that I was enlightened, bridging the class divide, and superior to her neoliberal paranoia. I mean, come on, it was just a flower. My advisor clocked all of this, so brought it up with me again a while later, saying he was worried I was being manipulated. I tried to tell him about Wendell's opera singing and impressions, and how he even almost went to college. But then I remembered the reason he lost his baseball scholarship, and I stopped short. Looking at it through that lens kind of made me reconsider the whole thing. I thought about what my professor had said. Sparing the details, we did talk for like half an hour, and I finally connected the dots that Wendell did have a history of drug use. And he did sometimes mention how a previous girlfriend, overreacting to something he had done, had derailed his life besides the drugs. So I decided maybe I should think about distancing myself a little. But very shortly after, the pandemic hit, and classes went virtual. So to save on rent, I went home to my parents' house. Still in the state, but not near campus at all. About 3 weeks into being home, I was watching a friend's Insta story when I had heard Wendell singing opera in the background, and I thought, I forgot all about him. Hope he's doing alright. And that was that. I kept watching different stories. Later that night, something about the story kind of stuck in my gut. It had popped in my mind a few times subconsciously, but I'd ignored it. But it kept coming back, so I decided to go and watch it again. That's when I realized my friend's video wasn't from our college town. It was from my much smaller hometown, which is nowhere near my college. That freaked me out a little, but I figured everyone moved around when the pandemic hit. My town isn't that small. It isn't that far from the college. It was probably a coincidence. I really wanted to mention it to my parents, but they had always warned me against talking to homeless people. Besides, like, Can I buy you a meal? So I felt too embarrassed to explain the situation to them, especially since it was probably a coincidence, and I would sound so conceited if I were like, he definitely followed me. Because aren't I just so great that he's probably obsessed with me? We have a type 1 diabetic in the family, so we took quarantining very seriously. I figured I'll never see him anyways. I'm not going out anytime soon, and it doesn't matter where he is. And nothing happened. Well, one thing. A girl from my high school who also ended up my college called me, and in summary said, "This is going to sound really weird, but I feel like I should say something. I was downtown and a beggar asked me about you, like specifically you. He knew you were on club volleyball. He knew your major. I didn't tell him anything, but I thought you should know." I was pretty alarmed at first because how would he know I know this girl? But once we talked, I learned that she had been wearing a sweatshirt from our college. So I thought about it and decided he probably saw that sweatshirt. Figured she might know me from college since we're both from this town, and was just trying to find out how I was doing. I thought it was sweet, also a little weird. But he was a little weird. That was part of his charm. I thanked her but told her not to worry about it. Besides, I wasn't in town much longer anyways. I had decided to go live back near campus. It was impossible to get my coursework done with my whole family around all day. So I went back to campus a while later. Didn't think about Wendell at all, until I saw him back on the same corner just a week after I returned to campus. Okay, even I knew at that time that something was wrong. I stopped giving him my money, stopped talking to him, but it was so humiliating by how low and mighty I might have been insisting that nothing was wrong, and everyone else was being paranoid and elitist, that I decided not to tell anyone what I had noticed. I was already barely leaving my apartment, never going on campus, and his usual spot was right by campus. I felt bad about potentially hurting his feelings, or reading too far into the situation, but I figured he'd get the message, and better safe than sorry. After finals, I decided to visit my brother in a different state. His roommates had moved home, leaving in an extra bed, so I drove up to his place to celebrate the end of the year and get away from it all. About the 9th day in, I was woken up way earlier than usual. When my brother isn't working in school, he sleeps until noon, to the sound of my brother talking at the door. I got up to see what was going on because we weren't seeing anyone. We stayed totally quarantined. His state was being hit pretty hard. My brother was talking nicely to someone outside through a crack in the door, and when he turned, he looked royally pissed at me. He turned back outside and said, "Hold on here." Closed the door despite the other guy protesting, but I couldn't hear what he said exactly. My brother immediately got in my face and, whisper yelling, said, "Mom and Dad are gonna kill you." I had no idea what he was talking about, but my first thought was the cops had come to arrest me for something. It was the only logical thing that I could generate first thing in the morning. The only thing I can imagine was being arrested for my fake ID, which I only ever used to get into concerts, and obviously none lately. So I was really shook. But my brother was still going, as best as I can remember because I was panicked at this point. He was saying, "And I'm gonna kill you. This is not cool. You didn't even ask." I wouldn't have said yes anyways. "But you didn't even think to ask?" I realized that you didn't align with being arrested, so finally I was like, What are you talking about?" And he said, "You're dating a 40-year-old guy? Older, 45 maybe? Of all the people out there, I mean, Jesus. Dad's gonna kill you, and then have a heart attack and die, which will kill Mom, and you invited him to my house while we're supposed to be socially distanced? You two can go get a hotel, because he isn't coming in here. I wasn't a dick to him, out of respect for you. But if he doesn't leave now, that's gonna change." So I had no idea what he was talking about. None. I hadn't connected any of the pieces yet. Because you've got to remember, Wendell was such a small part of my life until this point. I almost never saw him or thought about him. My whole world had been turned upside down by a pandemic in the preceding few months. He was background noise, faint background noise, compared to all the other stuff that I had going on. So I just said the first thing that came to mind. Dude, I don't know why you're getting so mad at me. I don't have a boyfriend. I don't know what you're talking about. Someone's got the wrong house. My brother looked like he was ready to rip my face off. He said, we're adults. Come on. Don't freaking lie to me. I'm not mom and dad. We can't deal with this if you're going to lie to my face. And I said I wasn't lying. I think you could tell from my expression and tone that I genuinely was serious. So now he was as confused and irritated as I was. And he was like, he didn't just vaguely say he was here for his girlfriend. He used your name. He rattled off a ton of very exact info. I think he said, yeah. He said you guys had a fight, and he was here to work things out. Now, I've been looking for a boyfriend for a long time, so I was half thinking, maybe dreams do come true. Might as well see who it is. But I was also starting to feel a bit sick in the pit of my stomach, because it would be one thing if this happened on campus or back home. But I had changed states. My brother moved to the state for school, and I didn't know anyone here but him and his friends. So I finally did the obvious thing and looked through the people. I almost didn't recognize him at first because he had showered, shaved, and changed into clean clothes. For the first time since I'd known him, but sure as shit, it was Wendell standing on my brother's doorstep, hundreds of miles from his original corner. I was so scared I couldn't speak. My heart was pounding like I was slipping under deep water, with my legs tied. I just backed away from the door and sat down on the couch and tried to collect myself. My brother thought that this was my affirmation that there really was some secret older boyfriend who had just made himself known. So it took a minute for him to cut off his ranting and his dramatic, what will grandma think stuff. Finally, he realized I was tearing up and he sat down, calmed down and apologized and said we'd figure it out. And I whispered, still out of breath, no, you don't understand. He followed me here. My brother still didn't get it. What? You don't want him to come here. What was your fight about? He asked. Still thinking the guy was my boyfriend, I managed to repress my panic enough to explain the broad strokes to him. But I don't think he fully grasped how creepy it was in the moment, because he was like, you're shitting me. That's hilarious. I'll take care of this. He went to the door and called from behind it. Yo, just checked. She's not here. Must have packed out this morning. You should do the same. I'm taking the social distancing real serious. And winked at me. That's when, as my brother says, when he tells his story, it got real. Wendell said, you're lying. I heard her in there. Tell her I'm sorry. I don't know why she's avoiding me, but I got cleaned up for her. And I'll take her anywhere she wants to go. Tell her that, tell her. Don't lie. I'll know if you lie. That rubbed my brother the wrong way. And he said back, bro, you're not taking her anywhere. Now, get off my deck before we have a problem. And Wendell sounded like he was walking away. But instead, he was going over to the window. When I saw him staring, he looked different than I'd ever seen him. Even then, a few seconds earlier, when I glanced through the people, his clothes were clean, but they didn't fit or match. Eyes bugged out of his head. White stuff caked on the corners of his mouth I hadn't noticed at first. Shaking, just kind of disconnected from reality. He started banging on the window, shouting things like, that's my girlfriend. You can't keep her in there. You little bitch ass. Let her out, you bitch ass. Let her out. Let her out. I'm coming, baby. I'm coming. I couldn't tell if it was meant as a threat or reassurance. I was so scared. I was too scared to run or even move. I think my brother was also as surprised by the sudden outburst. He was rolling up his sleeves like he was preparing to go out there, and I was trying to make my voice work to beg him not to. But I was so anxious, scared, and embarrassed, and sad that I'd missed all the signs leading up to this. All the opportunities prevented. That our friendship was never the wholesome thing I thought it was. Though, of course, that's something I had already began to grapple with before this day, and had so many thoughts swirling in my head, fear being chief among them. All I could do was scream. Not words, just and covered my ears to drown the whole situation out. Before my brother could charge out the door, he's an athletic guy, but I don't think he has ever actually been in a physical fight. Wendell punched through the window. Nothing actually happened when he punched, though, and there was an eerie moment of silence where nobody moved. I think even I stopped screaming, but when he pulled his hand back, all hell broke loose. A fair amount of blood started spurting out, and when he pulled his hand back through the glass, the things he was shouting started to make even less sense. Along the lines of, "Look what you did to me. This is a test. I told you I couldn't be stopped, bitch ass." And the look in his eyes got even more distant. I think the sight of the blood, which has always made my brother really squeamish, made him realize this was real. And he finally yelled, "Damn it, sis, call 911, while he leaned against the door, which Wendell was now repeatedly running into, even though he was nowhere close to breaking it down. I don't remember making the call, but apparently I did, because within 10 minutes the police arrested Wendell without resistance. He kept trying to tell them his girlfriend was trapped in the house, and he'd come all this way to save her. My poor brother was even momentarily handcuffed, and had to explain he hadn't taken me hostage. Probably one of the most haunting memories of the whole event is, as they carted Wendell away for arrest, he started singing opera music. I've learned a lot of important common sense and life lessons from this saga, but most of all, Wendell, let's not meet. So this happened about 9 years ago, when I was a 17-year-old teenager. I was a wild girl and was often getting into trouble with my two friends, Amy and Jackie. This one particular night, I was dropping them off after staying out late, doing our usual shenanigans. It was about 3 a.m. and they lived less than a mile from my house, in a safe neighborhood. First, I dropped Jackie off, and next was Amy. They lived one street over from each other, and off of a normally busy 2-lane road, with a median separating the traffic. But this night, we were the only car on the road. That is, until I saw headlights coming straight for us. I originally thought it was coming from the opposite side of the traffic, but it wasn't. I started frantically honking my horn because they were picking up speed and getting closer. I got as far right as possible and put on the brakes, bracing myself for a possible collision. Once the car was directly to the left of us, they abrasively skidded to a halt. I could see the figure of an older man between the ages of 50 to 60, with gray hair and glasses. I thought maybe he was having a medical emergency. I rolled down my window and started yelling, "Sir, are you alright? Do you need medical attention?" And this guy was staring straight ahead with his hands on 10 and 2, not moving a muscle. So I repeated, "Sir, are you okay? Can you hear me? Do you need me to call 911? This dude ever so slowly turned his head to face us, and I repeated the question for a third time, feeling uneasy now but still concerned. He still hasn't uttered a word when he slowly gets out of his car and just stands there, in the middle of the road, staring at Amy and I. Slowly, a smile starts blooming on his face. I realize it's time to get the frick out of there. I quickly put my car in gear, and when I do, this dude starts sprinting towards us. Now we're both screaming obscenities, and what the fricks at each other. I look in my rear view mirror, and now this guy is standing in the middle of the road, motionless. I decide to loop around to see if he's still there, and because I still have to drop Amy off. We loop around to the same road in maybe 3 minutes, and he's nowhere to be found. Him and his car are gone, with the only proof of our encounter the skid marks he left behind. 9 years later, and I still have no idea what happened. Did he need medical attention? Probably not, because he stood up and chased us. Why didn't he speak? Why was he driving on the wrong side of the road? And why was he moving so slowly? So, creepy ass dude who didn't speak. Let's never meet again. 5 years ago, when I was 18, I was really hurting. My long-term boyfriend cheated on me, and he loved her more than he ever loved me. It drove me wild, and I started to act pretty reckless. I had talked to a lot of people on obscure social media websites. One guy, Jack, seemed really sweet, and he was from around my area. Though on my profile I used a city nearby instead of the actual city I lived in. We started texting, and it seemed like we had a lot in common. New Year's Eve came around, and I didn't have any plans. I didn't want to be alone. Jack said we could meet up at a hotel and party together. I met up with Jack, and one of the first things he did was ask me if I really was 18. I didn't think it was odd because I looked extremely young, and people pretty much asked me on a daily basis. I work in retail, and customers literally would ask me if I was old enough to work here. So I thought it was a normal question. He made me show him my driver's license to prove I was of age. I did, and then asked to see his in return. He flashed it so briefly that I only saw one thing. The year he was born, 1983. I spent like 5 whole minutes pretending to act normal while secretly processing this. Jack was 32. 32. Freaking 32. I quickly felt bad vibes from Jack. I hung out with him only 2 more times before seeing that he was truly twisted. He didn't have a car, he lived with his mom, and I wasn't allowed over. He insulted his mom and described her as a bitch. He talked about hitting cops, he was vulgar and obscene, and it grossed me out. We went to a concert and he tried putting his hands up my shirt and down my pants while I was talking to someone there. He took me to a storage unit he had, and he wanted to hang out there because we couldn't go to his place. Inside there was only an air mattress and a container on the ground that he peed in. After that I completely ghosted Jack, but I didn't block him. Everyone asked me why I didn't block him, and I always responded, because if he ever texts me, that he wants to hurt me or find me, or threaten me in any way, I want to receive the text and have a record of it, instead of having it go into the void unseen. So he texts me every couple months for a year and a half. Totally delusional psycho stuff. Happy 4th of July. Wish you could be here with me. You're just a stupid slut with no brain. I'm crying imagining the beautiful life we could have had together. Then became, I'm so sorry, please talk to me, etc. He left me voicemails describing disgusting sexual things he wanted to do with me. One day I swore I saw him at the store I worked at. I felt a little scared and hid in the back room for a bit. I thought I was seeing things. Then it happened again a few months later, and I was sure it was him. But he didn't see me. A few days later, one of my coworkers told me someone named Jack came in here looking for you, but you weren't there. I told him you weren't in that day. He asked for your schedule, but I said I didn't have it. That's when the terror hit me. That reality set in that I was not safe. I went with my good friend to buy pepper spray that day. On the way there, my friend asked if I've ever Googled Jack. I said it hadn't occurred to me. I did right then and there, and a bunch of articles came up that described how he sexually harassed, threatened, and assaulted women. He had a serious record, including strangulations, slashing tires in cop cars, all kinds of assaults and battery, breach of the peace, trespassing, etc. There were news articles about him sending sexually explicit pictures to underage girls. I saw his mugshot. Seeing Jack's mugshot online was another reality check. That same day, I went back in bed at home with my parents. There was someone at the door, and my stepmom went to answer it. "Someone named Jack is here for you." She was confused. I immediately panicked and told her everything. She told him I wasn't there and he left. I finally called the police. Saving every text and voicemail from him came in handy, because I mailed it all to the officer handling my case. He responded that he was deeply disturbed, and by the voicemails, that apparently the case was severely more sinister than I let on with the police in person. I came in and gave statements. They put a warrant out for Jack's arrest. I got a full no-contact, protective order against him. During the month and a half it took for them to find Jack, he visited my work one more time. The security's got it all on tape. He walked around the entire store, every department, every aisle. Jack came to my house one more time. I was laying outside in the pool in my backyard. My stepmom came to tell me that she was leaving for work, and that I'd be home alone. She drove off only a few minutes later, and I hear a commotion in the driveway, and my stepmom yelling. I hear her scream, "Get inside right now and call 911. I knew Jack was there. I instantly jumped off the floating bed I was on, swam like I never swam before, and bolted up the stairs into the house, through the back door and locked it, ran to the front door and locked it, ran into my room and hid in my closet, all with crazy speed that I had no idea I was capable of. I remember hiding and hearing my heartbeat, hearing my crazy breathing, and hearing the water dripping all over the hardwood floors since I didn't get a towel. When my stepmom came, she told me that she was on her way to work, when she saw a car that looked like the one Jack had had when he came to see me that other time. And on a hunch, she turned around and followed him back here. That blows my mind. If she didn't notice that car, make that connection, feel that slight gut feeling, turn around and risk her job, I don't know what would have happened to me. That was my last encounter with Jack. Haven't heard from him since, but I'm still in fear constantly. He is awaiting a criminal trial. Please, Jack, let's not ever meet again. Ever. From 2013 to 2019, I worked in outdoor education at many different summer camps and outdoor education centers in Canada, mostly Ontario, but I did spend a season in the Rocky Mountains, having grown up going to sleepaway camp and eventually participating in month-long leadership programs with backcountry canoeing components. I was well prepared to lead a group of girls from a camp in Georgian Bay on a 2-week camping trip in the Temagami region during my first year as a counselor. The Temagami region is located between North Bay, Sudbury, and Timmins, Ontario. This region is home to many provincial parks, wonderful hiking and canoeing routes, and the Bears Island Indian Reserve. Our route was fairly typical, and beginning the Whitefish Falls region, ending at Highway 11 after 14 days of paddling, portaging, hiking, and campfire making. We all had satellite phones to check in with our camp director every day, and in case of an emergency. We also had multiple exit points along the route until our second to last night. We were having fun and relatively uneventful time, besides some mild dehydration and the usual bumps and bruises. Near the end of our trip, we were doing some free camping on the shore of an uninhabited island in Bear Lake that is recognized as part of Bear Island Indian Reserve. It is a beautiful area, and we're across from the main island that is a majority of the 250-person population inhabits. We had put out the fire and gone to bed, when about an hour later, after falling asleep, I was jarred awake by the sound of a loud motorboat. Obviously, this isn't that weird because it's a large lake, and many people use boats to reach the mainland or their homes on secluded islands. However, it was around 11 p.m., and things had been quiet for the last few hours. The motor could cut, and I could clearly hear the sounds of an argument. It sounded like at least one man and a woman, and they were very angry, yelling at each other, although I couldn't hear anything specific because they were too far offshore. Suddenly, the woman screamed, and I heard a splash in the water, and then complete silence. At this point, I was pretty freaked out, and hoping to God that my girls hadn't woken up. But I wasn't that lucky because I could immediately hear them talking from their tent, and could tell that they were scared. I was about to unzip my door and look out to see if maybe the boat had an accident or something when my whole tent lit up. The light slowly panned across me and onto the tent my girls were in. That immediately made them quiet. In a normal voice, I was able to tell them to stay absolutely still. The light panned back to my tent and then over to theirs again. I can only guess that it must have been some sort of boat with a searchlight on it. After an eternity, that was really only about 5 minutes. The light was turned off and I heard the motor engage and fade away as the boat drove away from us. I immediately found the satellite phone and called our camp director, who gave us the phone number for the local authorities. I called them and they said they would forward the information I gave to them to the local native detachment on Bear Island. I don't think any of us slept that night, and I got up at 5 a.m. to take my canoe out and take a look around. I thought maybe someone had fallen overboard and had managed to swim to shore. Obviously, I didn't find anyone, and there was nothing floating in the water either, although it was a pretty deep body of water. None of us wanted to camp one more night, so I called the camp and had to head to the pickup point a day early. We paddled like hell and didn't really talk much. I think none of us really wanted to speculate about what we might have heard and what would have happened if we made noise or moved when the light was on our tents. I thought about this a lot over the years, but whenever I told people this story, they've been quite skeptical. I recently started looking into missing persons cases in the area, but without much luck. If anyone reading this is familiar with the indigenous issues in Canada, though, there is an epidemic of missing and murdered indigenous women, and these cases usually go unreported or unsolved. This happened in August of 2017. I was 23 and just moved back to my mom's place, which happened to be about 30 minutes from my nearest friend's place. My car broke down, so I was Ubering everywhere I had to go. I went down to my friend's place to help them move. Went to Tart to grab some champagne and orange juice, because I apparently hated myself and thought an immediate hangover was a great idea. Fast forward to the night, and of course I'm doubled over throwing up with a migraine, and can barely lift my head, and I have to work the next day's morning shift. My friends have no idea where they have any sort of over-the-counter medicines for headaches. But of course, the stoner of the house offers me an edible. Now, I may have killed a bottle of champagne, but I haven't touched marijuana in years. I ate half of that edible and waited for about 45 minutes to feel better, and called my Uber. I was getting picked up in an apartment complex and of course had to walk to the front to find the driver, because I've never met an Uber driver that can locate any address with accuracy. I get into the back seat and he turns around to introduce himself. This guy has a southern drawl that would make molasses seem like water. It was at this moment I realized I fucked up. I told him I had a migraine and just wanted to go home. He pulls out a bottle of water that was already opened and some random pills and tells me these should make me feel much better. So of course I politely grab them and then proceed to stuff them in the seat and shove the water bottle in the pocket in front of me. We begin our 30-ish minute journey to my mom's apartment. If it weren't for Mary Jane coming along for the ride, I probably would have hopped out right then. This guy starts off the drive by telling me prison stories, and then somehow it delves into how the world's going to end by December 20th, something of 2017. Every few sentences, he is now bringing up his bunker. He asked me constantly if I wanted to head there instead of home. My high-ass self kept telling him that I'd love to, but I have to work so I can't. Maybe next time, I guess. He's cycling through conspiracies from the earth is flat to Kandahar, Afghanistan giants. He says, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but look up Kandahar, Afghanistan on YouTube. Also, in case y'all didn't know this, the world ain't heliocentric. Just get a pair of binoculars, you'll see. At some point he's telling me that he has an arsenal of guns. He asks me if I have guns, and my liberal millennial ass tells him I have lots of guns. He grows opium at his bunker, and again asks me to come with him. I'm panicked, texting everyone I know, sharing my location, and started recording. I managed to get about 7 minutes of total of the 30-minute drive on film. We're getting closer and closer to the exit he needs to take to drop me off. He's still in fear that left lane is the fourth left highway. I kept telling him to move over, an exit is coming up, and this creepy ass fucker keeps telling me how well stocked his bunker is. He misses my exit. Finally, I lose it and start screaming at him to get me home, and that my mom is waiting for me, and I have work tomorrow. Like my job means anything to the psycho, or even me. He finally does get off the exit after I start kicking his seat, threatening to jump out of the moving car. I ran out of the car so fast when he hit the red light outside of my apartment complex. As soon as I got inside, I tried telling my mom what happened, but she brushed it off as more disappointed that I told her I had taken an edible. The next morning, I coherently explained what actually happened and showed her the video, and we reported him to Uber. I still take Ubers on occasions, but I will never take one while alone or inebriated ever again. And this is the reason I don't consume THC. The universe knows when I'm high, and things like this happen to me. So, creepy Uber driver, wanting to take me to his bunker, let's not meet ever again.